This is the Comics Alternative, episode 237. Reviews of Starhawks, Volume 1, Street Angel, After School Kung Fu Special, and Godshaper, Number 1. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this week's episode, we're going to be looking at three new titles. We'll begin with Volume 1 of Starhawks by Kane and Goulart. After that, we're going to look at Jim Rugg and Brian Maruca's Street Angel, After School Kung Fu Special. Then we're going to wrap up with Godshaper Number 1 by Simon Spurrier and Jonas Goonface. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover. But often you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
That's right, and this month, as in every month, you can check out their bundles where they offer loads of comics from different publishers at a deeper discount than you would get if you got those comics individually. And this month, they have bundles from Marvel, DC, and Valiant that you can check out.
That's right. Every single month, you're going to find great discounts on a variety of different comics, either in bundled form or single copies. You have to go to the website and check out to see what they have lined up for April. That's dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
It's hard to believe that we're at the end or near the end of April, and before you know it, we'll be out of school, or at least classes momentarily. Mm-hmm. And that also means that we'll be at HeroesCon soon.
Yeah, that's right. I'm looking forward to it this year.
Yes. Now, for listeners of the show and even attendees of HeroesCon, you'll know that over the past 2 years, we've had a table in Artist Alley at HeroesCon, and we're going to have the same this year. We don't know where it's going to be yet. We don't know our location until like right before the event, but we will post on our website and our blog about where we are, and you can definitely come by and see us if you plan on being at HeroesCon this year.
Yeah, come and check it out. I will probably either be at the table or be diving through long boxes of cheap comics.
Yeah, and I want to do that, and of course interview a variety of creators on the floor. Mm-hmm. And if we're serious about this, if you plan on being there, come by and see us, stop by and hang out at the table. And in fact, maybe you could even help us for this year, because in the past when we've had a table at HeroesCon, my daughter Zoe has joined us, and she sat at the table while we were away at times. I don't think Zoe's going to be joining us this year, so that means if we have stuff at the table and we need someone there, if someone wants to come by and watch the table for us and help out the Comics Alternative, we would welcome that.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. I don't think I'm going to have anybody with to help. So
yeah, but we will have some merchandise there to sell our T-shirts, and if you do help us out, who knows? You can get a T-shirt out of it.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, but we will let you know where we're going to be specifically in Artist Alley at HeroesCon, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and let us know if you're going to be there too.
Okay, let's begin our discussion for this week, and we're going to start with Starhawks Volume 1, 1977 through 1978. This is another reprint of the classic newspaper strip by Gil Kane and Rob Goulart, and this comes out from IDW and its Library of American Comics imprint.
Yeah, and when this was announced in previews, I was pretty excited to see this happening because this is a series I like a lot, and while I have it in various other forms, a huge Gil Kane fan, so this was something I've always sought out. And so while I have it in a lot of different forms, none of those forms has really been a great reproduction of this series. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that Library of American Comics is giving it a special treatment.
Right. Now, this volume that we're going to be discussing, it's going to be coming out in bookstores on April 25th, so probably the day after this episode goes, or the day before this episode goes up. Mm. And it may have been in comic shops before then. I don't know. But Andy, you have some experience with Starhawks in collected form. So how does this IDW volume stack up to the ones that you know about previously?
Okay, so while I was preparing for this episode, I got out my various versions of Starhawks that I own. Okay, so I'll go. Let's see.
Versions plural.
I'll go through how many of these I have. So there's in the late. So the series started in 1977. So in 79 or so, they, Ace Paperbacks put out a mass market size version of the first couple stories. And so I have that, and that one is, it's mass market size, but, well, I guess maybe to back up a second too, for those who don't know about Starhawks, what makes it special, other than the fact that Ron Goulart and Gil Kane were top-notch creators working on this series, that it was designed to be a two-tiered daily comic strip. So whereas pretty much every other comic strip is a single tier, or just 3 panels or whatever. Kane wanted to expand what you could do in a daily comic strip to 2 tiers, but not simply limiting himself to 3 panels on top and 3 panels on the bottom, but to be able to experiment with panel design and so on in a comic strip, doing things that you couldn't do in a regular daily strip. Mm-hmm. And plus then to be doing it in this space opera science fiction genre. And they happened to time it just about right because Star Wars was on the verge of coming out when they were creating this. So it happened to be good timing. So anyway, so then Ace Books collected some of the stories in mass market paperback size, and because it's a 2-tier strip, they printed the book in landscape format, so it's one strip basically per page in that book. And then back in the 80s, I'm sure I'm missing some other reprints of this, but in the mid 80s, the company Blackthorn Publishing, which reproduced a lot of comic strips. I have some Mandrake the Magician they did, and some Tarzan books as well. And they reprinted Starhawks in a regular sized comic book format, but with kind of square bound, because they're about 80 pages or so at a time. And so that would be, they would do two strips per page in a regular format. In the meantime, around that same time, the magazine Amazing Heroes was reprinting Starhawks as well, and so that was the main way I got it originally when it, or I not originally, but that's the way I first saw it. I don't ever remember seeing Starhawks in a newspaper.
When you were a kid, you didn't read it?
Yeah, when I was a kid. Did you?
No, and it could have been in the Charlotte Observer. I don't know, but if it was, I didn't read it.
Yeah. And then a few years ago, Hermes Press put out one giant book with all of the Starhawks strips in it. I guess more than a few years ago. It was 2003. So, and for this, they shrunk the strips down quite a bit and did four strips per page.
Wow.
And then some years into Starhawks, which we'll probably get in later volumes, it went to a single tier strip. And it talks about Ron Goulart talks about that in the introduction of this as well. And so then Hermes did eight strips a page, or 7 if there's a Sunday strip, because the Sunday strip stayed large formatted. So anyway, that's a long way to talk about that. And so for the last 14 years, the main way you could get Starhawks, unless you could track down some of these other reprint versions, was in this Hermes Press book, which unfortunately isn't a great reproduction. Hermes Press does some great stuff, especially nowadays. Some of their strip reprints are among my favorites, but this unfortunately was not the best approach to this format. It is actually pretty hard, at least for me, to read, because their things are really shrunk down. Now, one of the nice things that they do is they do give chapter titles for the different storylines, which we don't get in the other.
In the Hermes Press?
Yeah, Hermes Press gives titles for the different storylines. But they also don't. They give credit to the writers, because Ron Goulart left the series after a while, and then Archie Goodwin, who was a frequent collaborator with Kane, took over the scripting, and then even later on, Roger McKenzie for the last couple stories scripted. But they don't give credit to the ghost artists who helped Kane out. And so I'm going to be curious to see how the later volumes of what the Library of American Comics does to handle that, plus handling the fact that the series does go to a single tier format. Will they keep the same design and so on? But also, will they more clearly acknowledge who the artists are on some of those later strips, like Ernie Cohen and Howard Chaykin, did some ghosting, and I think Chaykin actually does a pretty decent job of mimicking Kane's style. I think Ernie Cohen's easier to spot, but Ernie Cohen's style is also within the realm of Kane's. So it's not too disruptive when the artists change. But anyway, so for the Library of American Comics, they've put out this volume that has one strip per page, and we basically get a year's worth or so.
Yeah,
of comics.
Not quite. One of the things that we get in this IDW volume is a strip per page and the date in which it appeared. So it started on the 3rd of October, 1977, and this first volume ends with August 10th, 1978. Now, you mentioned a future volume of Starhawks. Volume 2 will actually be coming out later this year in November, so that's something to look forward to.
That's interesting. I wanted to check that out, because then that raises a question for me at the end, with the end of the book, to kind of jump ahead and not spoil. But this volume ends with the storyline that's going on in the issue, or in the book, incomplete.
Yeah.
And I looked up to see what the rest of that story was. And
in the Hermes volume?
In any of the other ones. There's only 10 strips left in that story.
And I wonder why they didn't decide to include them in this first volume.
Yeah, especially if they're not cutting it off completely at 365 days or whatever from the first strip. That does seem curious, but if you want to find out what happens to Rex Jackson, then you can check it out and get the next volume. Yeah.
Now, roughly speaking, we have what seems to me at least 4 storylines in this first volume, in the IDW volume. And I guess the first story is when the protagonists, Rex and Chavez, who are like space police, right? And the system that they work for is what? Interplan. Well, what's it called? Interplan.
Yeah.
Something I can't. Yeah.
I've got it right here.
Yeah. You've got it multiple times.
Interplanetary Law Service.
That's right. So they're basically space police, and the various storylines are a series of cases that they're on. The first one that kicks things off, that starts the series, is with this. I guess it deals with a wealthy family where the widow, who is a stepmother of a woman by the name of Nada, her and her henchman Raker are behind some nefarious activities to kill an emperor. And so that's the first storyline. The second one takes place in a place called Empire 13, where the chief, Alex K. Benyon, sends Rex and Chavez in order to find, I think, a stash of weapons that they think may exist. And then they end up getting involved inadvertently in rebel activity against the dictator of Empire 13. And then the fourth storyline is where they go to the Hotel Maximus because of some things seem suspicious there. Some diplomats have gone missing, and they think that terrorists, criminals of some sort are behind this. And then that segues into the final narrative arc, which is when Rex goes to, and also Chavez, but separately, to a distant system, to a planet called Selva, to find out what's going on. And this is that storyline that ends, as you suggest, before the last 10 panels that I guess we'll get in the second volume in November.
Yeah. Now, looking at the Hermes Press book just for a second, they actually do end that one later than 10 strips, but there seems to be a little bit of a subplot that goes on following, but there is in some of the other books a what seems to be a pretty clear-cut conclusion to that story, and then a little kind of short story that follows up on it and continues with the Brotherhood, this criminal organization that I think we get introduced to in the Hotel Maximus story.
Yeah. Now you had mentioned the introduction that Ron Goulart writes for this IDW volume that we're discussing, and I found that was really useful. I mean, first off, he's the writer of this series, or at least the writer at the very beginning. He was the one, along with Gil Kane, who really came up with it for the most part. At least they started everything. And so he gives us some background about the series, how it came about. And there are a couple of things that I thought were really interesting, one of which was he pointed out that some people tend to think that Starhawks is the result of the popularity of Star Wars, which is not the case. He lets us know that this is something that he and Kane had in the works before they found out about Star Wars. It's just, as you put it a moment ago, good timing that this came out around that time, because it really did help them to get carried in a number of newspapers. And then the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is, again, something that you referenced, and that is the two-tiered system of each of the strips and how it allowed them to experiment around in ways that are more reminiscent of, let's say, comic book paneling in a newspaper strips. And on the one hand, that was something that made Starhawk stand out because it was innovative. On the other hand, Goulart feels that it limited their audience because newspapers only have so much space, period. And, specifically with the newspaper or the comic section. And so this comic would take up more space than, let's say, a one-tiered strip. So then they had to make a choice as an editor of a newspaper, what to include, what not to include. And so Goulart says that they probably weren't carried in a lot of newspapers because of the fact that they were two-tiered.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why I don't remember ever seeing it, because I would guess that maybe, the Fargo newspaper where I grew up, they were still running reprints of Henry, the kid without a mouth, the bald kid without a mouth who scared the crap out of me.
Yeah,
and so they weren't ready for something challenging and innovative like what was going on here. And I think that's kind of true throughout the history of comic strips, especially definitely in the latter half of the 20th century, up to today, that it is very hard to get newspapers to try something new and try something different. And then when you put on top of it the fact that if they were to try Starhawks out, they would have to bounce 2 strips in order for it to fit into their paper. It makes it surprising to me that the series lasted as long as it did.
Yeah. And, another thing that Goulart points out that I think is worth mentioning in his introduction is that what they were trying to do with Starhawks is to bring back the adventure strip, in the way that, let's say, it had once been popular with Little Orphan Annie, with Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon, Tarzan, things of that sort. And so this was their attempt to do that. So that's another, I guess, kind of difference that they're trying to bring to newspaper strips at the same time. So if you think about it, they really had things stacked against them. And I'm wondering what the circulation back in 77, 78 was on Starhawks.
Yeah, I wonder that too. And I'm trying to remember how long Starhawks ends up lasting then. Goulart says in that introduction, but I'm drawing a blank on it right now. 81 or 82. So it lasts a good 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, but in its last year or so, switches formats, and that doesn't actually seem to save it.
We've been talking a lot about the context surrounding these stories, the various editions, the history behind this. Let's talk a little bit about the content. As we pointed out earlier, in this volume that takes us from October of 1977 to August of 78, there are basically 4 storylines that are going on here. And, as you pointed out, we have the 2 space officers, Rex and Chavez, and they go on various missions. This collection does read like a collection of newspaper strips, and what you would expect. In other words, every now and again, it's really obvious that the first one, sometimes 2 panels of a strip, recaps almost exactly what happened in the last 1 or 2 panels of the previous strip. So you may get this sense of repetition, but again, it's to be expected. And I don't really think that it screws up the reading experience because, again, I mean, these originally appeared as newspaper strips. What I think comes across as maybe, I guess, dated is the correct word for this, is the character of Chavez. Mm-hmm. And the way that he approaches his work, especially whenever women are involved.
Well, approaches his work whenever women are involved or whenever women aren't involved, because it seems like his primary concern is, there are no women on this planet, or there's no chance of meeting women on this adventure.
And not just any women, nifty looking ladies.
Nifty looking ladies. Yeah. And so that's the first thing on his mind. And that does get a little repetitive, even just in this first year or so. But at the same time, it's also a way of kind of giving these characters, kind of shorthand personalities.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Chavez ends up getting into some romantic entanglements with a coworker,
Tammany,
then that ends up kind of developing through the series as well, and she turns out to be a kind of formidable companion for him.
I'm glad that you put it that way, that even with these at times maybe heavy-handed attempts at defining certain characters, and I think Chavez is the most striking example here, but there are others as well. It does give them some kind of identity and to a large degree life. Because after reading this first volume, now keep in mind you knew about Starhawks, you were a fan of Starhawks before this IDW volume. This is the first time that I've read Starhawks, so I don't know Starhawks after volume 1 that we have here. But it seems to me that by the time I finish this first volume, I pretty much have a decent sense of who all the characters are, except for Rex. One of the protagonists, Rex Jackson. Chavez, definitely. His character, as potentially problematic or comical, if you want to put it that way, as it is. I still know who this guy is, what the defining characteristics are. Same thing with their chief, Alice Benyon, and even some of the minor players as well, like Sniffer, the mechanical dog who works with them. Shatterbox, a character that we see for a brief period of time. I get a better sense of who these guys are than Rex, because Rex comes across as, a good-looking, well-chiseled, heroic type of figure that we've seen time and time again. And because he is very much a type, an adventure type, I feel like I don't know him. He doesn't develop other than that type. So, for instance, he's not this heroic crime fighter in space who has a really strange pet peeve that could make him stand out in some way. But, his character seems to be almost a blank to me by the time I finish this book. I know who he is. I know how I can attempt to describe him, but he doesn't stand out as a personality.
Yeah, he's kind of the generic good-looking hero. We do get his romantic interests developing with his boss, Alice Kay. And that, and so there is that, but you're right. We don't know why he is, we don't have an origin for him. We don't know why he's a member of Starhawks. What drives him. He's just kind of basically, generic blonde hero. And I feel like even if we were to think about this as being an attempt to recapture the adventure serial, not just the ones you mentioned, but even the science fiction ones like Flash Gordon, it feels like Flash Gordon even has a greater motivation in his story for being a hero. Rex is just, you don't, it doesn't even seem like you need to know all that much about him. He is just the guy who's gonna save the day, and Chavez is gonna be the comic relief sidekick, and then Sniffer's also going to be comic relief.
And Sniffer and Chavez have a kind of tense relationship at times, but it's in good nature, even though there is some tenseness at times, and so that I think drives the story as well. Now, since you've read this series in its entirety, or at least beyond this first volume that we have with IDW, do we learn more about Rex Jackson than we do in this first volume, or does he remain this kind of generic blank figure?
Boy, I don't remember. It's been a long time since I read beyond these first these first stories, because because other than the Hermes Press books, most of the stuff I have is reprinting the stuff that's in this book. So I've read this stuff over and over again, but I've only really read through that Hermes Press book once, and that was a long time ago. So sorry, I can't help you there. Or maybe I'm trying to avoid spoilers.
Maybe that's it. Yeah.
Maybe I'm not stupid like you think.
Well, how did this series read to you? I mean, you were familiar with it before, so going back and rereading what is almost the first year of its run, do you think that it still has a feeling of freshness?
It's interesting because one of the things you said earlier about how, when you're reading a comic strip reprint, you have to accept the fact that there's going to be some repetition at the beginning of a specific, from one beginning of each new strip to kind of catch readers up. But I found that Starhawks does a pretty good job of minimizing that repetition. So but except for what I'm guessing are probably the Sunday strips, we don't get a distinction between the, Monday through Saturday strips and the Sunday strips in here. We just get, because the Sunday strips were in the same format. But it does seem like when you get to one of those, you get like maybe a couple panels that actually are almost word for word repetitions of the end of the previous ones. But that's also the case that we don't get them in color either, and they were originally in color. So we're missing out on that. So you don't get to know that for example, Rex Jackson has pure white hair. So that might add some character to him for you.
Oh, okay.
Probably not though, right? So I, in reading through it, I enjoyed it. I got, I see the issues you were raising with Chavez. I found him to be kind of a throwback of sorts, and but I think that the series holds up surprisingly well. I don't know if I've heard here and there rumors of kind of a revival of Starhawks. I don't know if we'll ever see that, but it's as a concept, it seems to work pretty well. And the storyline that stood out to me the most here is the Hotel Maximus storyline. I felt like that was the one that not only is it kind of inventive because you have this pleasure hotel in which every level has a different almost world that
environment.
You can go to. Environment. And that allowed Kane to draw dinosaurs, which he loved to draw, for example. And so I think that maybe, I don't know the whole motive behind that storyline, but maybe if the motive is to create a storyline in which Kane could exercise some of his his strengths and the things he really loved to draw, I think that that is also reflected in that being a really good story out of all these stories.
Yeah. I enjoyed the Hotel Maximus storyline as well. I do think that was, if not the strongest, then definitely one of the strongest of the four that we have. in this first volume. And I also enjoyed a lot of the minor characters. Now, we were talking about the colorful character of Chavez, and even though he may be particularly annoying, if not offensive to some readers, I mean, after a while, I did feel like, okay, we get enough of these nifty-looking lady references, but then it became funny, and so if he didn't say something like that, I found myself disappointed. But he's a main character, but we also have some notable minor characters as well. One, actually, she got on my nerves for a bit, is the Who's Gal, which is where their office is. Interestingly enough, it's called the Who's Gal. The psychologist, Aunt Jenny.
Yeah.
Who is the one who talks with Alice Kay, the chief, all the time, and keeps bringing up to Alice Kay, that you really are in love with Rex, and if you admit this, then everything will be better. And so Aunt Jenny, she's memorable, if not maybe a little annoying at times. But one of my favorite characters was a villain, and we're introduced to him at the Hotel Maximus, and that is Tux, a robot in a tuxedo and a derby.
Mm-hmm. Who talks like he's
gangster.
Out of a gangster movie, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was funny that they have this robot in a distant land in a tuxedo sounding like a gangster from Earth.
Yeah. That's a fun character, and I think the whole idea of introducing to the Brotherhood, which is can be a formidable enemy for the Starhawks, is a good idea as well. A lot of the stories would otherwise then just be dealing with them either trying to liberate a planet or save a planet from being taken over or something like that. So,
and without giving anything away, no spoilers, there are certain antagonists or villains who do recur in this first volume. So it is interesting how not just one storyline flows smoothly into another, but that there is more thread that kind of closely links one narrative arc to another in this series.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting too, because the like I said, the Hermes Press book has chapter separations for each storyline, and I wouldn't always cut off the story where they cut it off. And I don't know if there was some indication in the strip itself that would say, next week, blank starts. But it seems to me that the series is so fluid, moving from one story to the next, that I think it does read better in a volume like what IDW is doing here.
Right. Now, speaking specifically about the IDW volume, how did you like the presentation? The way that it was collected?
Yeah, I like the idea of, again, having been used to reading really, really tiny reproductions, having them big on the page like this is really nice. Having a book, though, that is wider than it is tall, does create some problems, especially as thick as this is. I really felt sometimes when I was reading it that I was putting a lot of strain on the glue that holds the cover to the pages. I mean, I
felt the same
feel
thing.
It slipping, but I do like I like the look of it. I think these are going to look nice together on a shelf. And I like that they put the little, I don't know what the term for it is, the ribbon, the bookmark ribbon.
Right.
That goes in it. That adds a sense of class.
Yeah. And, one of the things, I guess, that Dean Mullaney, who's the editor of the Library of American Comics series, one of the things they could have done is to make the book kind of taller to where it's more of a traditional trade size, where you have 2 daily strips per page. But in doing that, it would have made it easier to hold, because not only did I feel the spine or the glue being strained as I held the book, but I also felt it on my wrists as I was holding the book and trying to read it that way. But I guess they retained this particular format, the more horizontal kind, because it reflects the other volumes, or most of the other volumes in the Library of American Comics series that are strips, right? So it needs to be uniform for that reason.
Yep.
Yeah. But I like these, and I'm glad that you recommended that we take a look at this first volume of Starhawks.
Yeah, I'm glad we got a chance to look at these, and as you said, we got a second volume coming out.
November.
So in November, and I'll be curious. So just in time for Christmas, and then I'll be curious to see how they do the later volumes, because it is after the second volume that Goulart leaves, and other artists help Kane out when he gets sick, and they switch to a single tier. I hope they do finish out the whole series and not just do the Goulart and Kane stories, but those are the best.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's begin discussing the next title for this week, and this is Street Angel After School Kung Fu Special. This comes out this week, and it's by Jim Rugg and Brian Maruca. And Andy, you and I, a couple of years ago, had Jim Rugg on the show, and we specifically talked with him about, at the time, that new collection, a relatively new collection of Street Angel, which came out in 2014. So it's really good to see that Rugg and Maruca are bringing back this character.
Yeah, and I don't know if you follow Jim Rugg on social media at all, but he is constantly posting new Street Angel material, some of the stuff that's going into this, and I think some of the stuff that's going into whatever is coming next. And so that for me has been building anticipation for this comic as well.
Okay, so what we have now with the After School Kung Fu Special, he had been posting this, what was it, on Tumblr or Instagram?
I see it on Facebook, but I'm sure it's in as many possible formats as you can find. But yeah, he posts work in progress. But Jim Rugg also does just a whole bunch of interesting things. One of the things, and we talked to him about this in that interview, how he likes to work in really unconventional media, like spiral bound notebook and Bic pen, stuff like that. So, and you see some of that stuff in this Kung Fu After School Special too, because since Street Angel is in high school or junior high, that a lot of the things that Jim Rugg does that kind of call back to the way kids would draw in their notebooks or write in their textbooks and stuff like that shows up as material in Street Angel.
Yeah, in fact, that's how this issue begins. It looks like a couple of pages either from a notebook or even in a textbook that's been assigned to a student with a lot of illustrations and sketches and doodles and just whatnot, and sometimes even profanity. But I really appreciate this. This is fun. I mean, I like the character Street Angel and her stories, and so it's good to see Street Angel coming back in print. But this is with a different publisher, because we were talking about that 2014 collection, Street Angel, and that was through Ad House. But this Street Angel After School Kung Fu Special is from Image Comics.
Right. And I don't know if that means that we're going to see more Street Angel from through Image, or this is just a one-time deal.
I'm hoping that we get through Image a series of these one-shots.
Yeah. I like, the more Street Angel, the better.
Yeah. Now in this story, it's not that involved. Jesse Sanchez, who is Street Angel, basically she has a rivalry with a character by the name of Jacob in school. And basically Jacob challenges Jesse to a fight. And so this is the Kung Fu special part of the subtitle that takes place after school. But at the same time, we're also introduced to Jesse's friend, Belle. And Belle is very much aware of Jesse as Street Angel, but Belle's sense of, I guess, school and her interactions with Jesse is much more mundane. So Belle is concerned with the upcoming school dance and wanting to make sure that Jesse attends, which Jesse doesn't want to. But Belle is trying to convince Jesse to go because it'll be fun, and also it's a Sadie Hawkins dance.
Yeah, and Jesse says, I don't know who she is.
Yeah. So, yeah, great humor in this, as you come to expect from Street Angel.
Yeah. I love Rugg and Maruca's humor, and I do like the way that they've developed Street Angel's character. Jesse is she's homeless, and so she doesn't have a lot of the plus she's always training, so she doesn't have a lot of like the social skills that other students have, or some of the I don't know, like kind of pop culture connections, I guess, that that they might have. And so so Jesse, so basically the plot of this is that this Jacob has picked a fight with Jesse, posted a note in her locker saying 3:30 the yard. They're going to fight. And it's then basically that day, how that day goes with this impending Sadie Hawkins dance going on in the background. And so the two of them antagonize each other throughout the story up until we get to their fight. And the fight is done in this great Jim Rugg style, where it's these massive 2-page spreads with or just really big images with a lot of action, and I'm almost in an anime style.
Right, and the fight lasts about half of this issue.
Yeah.
Or maybe a little over half of the story time of this issue. And that's part of the fun of this, is that you do get to see this extended, decompressed, if you will, fight scene in the way that Rugg illustrates this. So yeah, that's why I said earlier there, nothing too convoluted and complicated about the story, but it's just about, Jesse and Jacob getting into a fight and that day leading up to the actual fight. And of course, when we see Jesse, Street Angel, she has been out fighting crime, and so she's tired, she's smelly, and she falls asleep in class. She really doesn't give a damn what's going on around her. And Jacob and Belle seem to be the only ones really concerned with what's going on.
Right. And I think that, the way you describe that is good. And I also think that, that if this were somebody's first exposure to Street Angel, I think it would be perfectly fine. It doesn't feel like you need to know a lot. I mean, there's mentions of Juan, for example, another character who doesn't appear here, but otherwise, I think you could read this and not have to worry about, being behind on Street Angel continuity. It's pretty straightforward and self-contained.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Although, if someone picks up Street Angel After School Kung Fu Special and likes what they read, then they should definitely check out that Ad House book.
Yeah. Yeah,
to
definitely.
get much more of a Street Angel fix. Now we should mention in terms of the Ad House book that there are two versions of it.
Mm-hmm.
The first one that came out is it's in black and white, and so it's a pink book on the cover, on the binding, but then inside it's just black and white. And then in a different printing that came out several months later, they printed it out on pink paper.
Right. Yeah.
But this one, it's neither of those. This is a single issue in full color.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I particularly liked about this first issue, and even before the story begins, is the Fletcher Hanks reference.
Yeah. Street Angel fighting, was it Stardust?
Yeah, is that his name?
I can't remember.
Yeah. Lopping off his head.
Yeah. And there is even a at one point a footnote that references, see, I shall destroy all civilized planets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a space. Let's see. So Belle says, this is early on. Belle is Jesse's BFF at Van Buren Middle School. And Jesse's explaining she was late for school because she was stuck in another dimension. A space wizard was tripping. And then the footnote says, as seen in I Shall Destroy All Civilized Planets, which, yeah, that's great. I don't remember Street Angel being in the comic.
And, along with that, there are a couple of other notes like that, where, like, the one that you referenced, that panel that mentions see all, or I shall destroy all civilized planets. There's also a reference about Belle, saying that she first appeared in Fist Fight Funnies #4.
Mm-hmm.
And the little things like that again kind of assumes this faux history behind the comic Street Angel, that she has appeared in back issues of things such as Fist Fight Funnies. Although Rugg tells us at the end of this issue, because there's some supplemental material after the story itself. Mm-hmm. Or is it Rugg, or is it
it's Rugg,
Maruca? Okay, who tells us that that was Fist Fight Funnies was one of the working titles for what eventually became After School Kung Fu Special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that reminds me. I really like the torn out sheet of notebook paper that has the book club classroom discussion questions that are your basic, like, middle school language arts class generic questions. What was your initial reaction to the book? How did your opinion change as you read it? Is the plot well developed? Is it believable? Do you feel manipulated, or do plot events unfold naturally or organically? And so on. These kind of generic questions. But then it does get into more specific things, which fighting style do you think is the most effective? But yeah, so I do, normally I'm kind of indifferent about the process stuff. But I do like how Jim talks about the collaboration with Brian Maruca, and then about how he goes from getting the script to kind of roughing out panels on the script itself to putting together the pages.
Yeah.
So are you ready to move on to Godshaper?
Yeah, let's look at Godshaper #1. This is written by Simon Spurrier with art by Jonas Goonface. And by the way, is his name pronounced Goonface?
That's how it's spelled. It's not
the name he has adopted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, I was looking online before we were recording this to see if there is something about the pronunciation of this that I should know. But anyway, this came out last week from Boom Studios, and this is a different kind of story, very different from what we've been discussing with the other two titles for this week.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, this is by Simon Spurrier, and we've talked about in the past some other Simon Spurrier's work, especially Six Gun Gorilla, which I really liked. And I feel like when I was reading this, it really did feel like I was like Six Gun Gorilla, especially in the way that Spurrier does his world building with a universe that has very different rules than our own, but also a culture that has even a slightly different language to describe those things that are different. And so you enter, like I felt like with Six Gun Gorilla and other stuff of his, you enter the world that feels like it already exists. Right. You're not seeing it kind of built up around you, and you're not even really carefully handheld through it. But we do get at least some of the basic ideas here, which is that everybody that something goes wrong in 1958 where electricity stops working. But instead, everybody gets their own personal god, basically. Yeah. A little creature that can do special things and basically earns currency as beads for however powerful it gets in relationship to what it does for, I guess, for society, whether it's so there are, we see in the first page a god that's a barber, a god that's making milkshakes, one that can produce photographs. So a lot of the things that we use technology for are being done by these kind of very, very specialized gods that individuals have. And the more successful those gods are, it seems, the more beads they earn, the more powerful they can become. And then they can also, it's like in a video game, level up and gain more powers as they get more powerful. Right.
Now, almost everyone in this particular world, after 1958, has his or her own god. But there are a few who do not have a god associated with them. And what are they called? The no gods? But our main character, or one of our main characters, Ine, is such an individual, but he is a shaper. And I think, so I guess individuals who do not have a god have the power, or at least the potential, to shape other people's gods. And what that means is being able to kind of change, manipulate sometimes the way that a god looks, maybe even the powers of a particular god. And so, at least in the case of Ine, these god shapers seem to be itinerant, going from place to place, and on the one hand being shunned because there's no god associated with them. On the other hand, though, used by those who do have the gods in order to shape and manipulate their god into being something that the owner wants it to be, that it's not.
Yeah. And so these, what are they, no-goddies instead of nobodies. No-goddies are shunned, but they're also useful. Right. So when people want to take advantage of the skills of a god shaper, they have to do it kind of on the sly, because even though everybody kind of knows you need to use them once in a while, nobody wants to admit it.
Right. Now, just as almost every human has a god, Conversely, every god needs a human in order to survive, because if a god is not connected to an individual, then no one believes in them and they will eventually fade away, so to speak. Now, Ine's partner is a god who's not connected to any human, and his name is Bud. Now, we don't know yet how Bud is able to survive, since he's not the god of any individual, but he's a partner of Ine. So he's not Ine's god, but we have two people who are loners, more or less, but who come together and who work together for whatever it is that they're doing. And we get in the opening pages of this first issue the establishment of that relationship, right? So we see this world with, everyone has a god for the most part. We're introduced to Ine, who comes into town and he advertises his services. There is someone by the name of Benny Boggs who hires Ine on the sly, as you pointed out, to shape his god. But little does Boggs know that Ine is using his powers and occupation as a Godshaper to have his partner, Bud, the humanless god, look for things that Bog has. And then this is what kind of sets up the rest of this issue, especially what we find out toward the end.
Right.
Because it comes back to this character, Boggs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so most of what this first issue does is set up the world that we're entering into and set up Ine's role in it and give us a little bit about this relationship with Bud. But there's also something else going on with Ine too in his music career. Which I'm not yet 100% sure of what's going on there. And there's a couple pages of almost like a kind of montage sequence without panels of Ine going through this bar that he's playing at and having these different interactions with people there.
Right. Now, the kind of music that they're playing is called cantic, isn't it?
Yeah. And I don't know what, what that compares to, I guess. So Ine has this double life, and it doesn't seem like being a cantic is necessarily mutually exclusive to having a god, right? You could be a cantic, I think, and have a god.
Right.
Because I think
there's some people at the concert who do have their gods.
Yeah, but there's some people, it seems like, say to Ine, you could do this, you could do this with a god. And others do. So, so I'm curious to see if that, how that kind of double life that he has plays out in the rest of the series, or what the purpose is. Because it also seems to point out that he has a kind of fluid sexuality as well. We see him making out with both women and men, for example, in this montage sequence, for example. And so I think that's the point of the book that to me sets up the most mysteries, to see how these dual lives that Ine has as Godshaper and as cantic will work out.
Right, and what those two worlds have in common is that both make him an outsider.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Along with his god pal Bud, who is an outsider in his own way.
Right.
Yeah. Getting back to something that you had mentioned earlier about this kind of feeling like a Simon Spurrier narrative with this rather complex world that we have. I remember when we looked at this solicit a couple of months ago in that preview show, it seemed a little convoluted, and I had wondered if this was going to be a premise that may potentially fall over of its own weight, right? So the exposition to this world would be so top heavy that maybe the story couldn't play out in a satisfying way. I don't know. I feel though after reading this first issue that I still have a lot of questions about the story world, but it seemed to go off well here. I don't feel lost, in other words, in this first issue with what's going on.
No, I don't feel lost either, but I do feel like it helps to have read some of Spurrier's other work to kind of know that, any questions that we have will be kind of fulfilled through the kind of ongoing process of building the world over the course of the series. And with Six Gun Gorilla, I think I bought all the individual issues, but I ended up waiting kind of after reading the first issue or so, waiting to read the whole series all at once. And I feel like his work does a better job as a whole than it does as individual parts. So, I don't necessarily know if I'm going to advocate for trade waiting on this series, but I definitely feel like it helps with his stuff to get immersed in it for a period of time, especially when you have to get used to figuring out what some of the neologisms are that he uses. For the world, there's a language here that everybody in the story world knows and understands, and the story's not going to keep stopping to remind us what that terminology means. So the more I think one can get immersed in this world in a continual basis, rather than say from month to month, maybe the better the reading experience will be.
Right. Now, this, at least from this first issue on the cover, is going to be a 4-issue miniseries. Mm-hmm. So if, you say you didn't know if you wanted to advocate trade waiting for this, but if someone were to wait, then they only have to wait for 4 issues, and then it will be collected.
Mm-hmm.
And there we go. The 3 titles that we discussed for this week was Starhawks Volume 1, 1977 through 1978 by Gil Kane and Ron Goulart. After that, we looked at Jim Rugg and Brian Maruca's Street Angel After School Kung Fu Special, one shot. And then we wrapped up with Simon Spurrier and Jonas Goonface's, I love saying that, Godshaper #1.
That's right. So those are the three books we looked at, and I think I'd recommend listeners check out all 3 of them.
Yeah, really good stuff. And if you want to find great titles like these, then definitely check out the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com. Every single month, you're going to find some wonderful specials. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about this week's episode. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right, or you can get a hold of us by email. We are 2guys@comicsalternative.com, and you can also get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And you can also check out our Twitter feed at the number 2 guys with PhDs.
That's right. You can also find us on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. All the ways to get a hold of us and find out what we're doing and let us know how we're doing.
That's right. And we do like hearing from you, so get in touch. Until next week, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.